Welcome to the Point Cybersecurity Podcast. Each week, join Eric Trexler and Rachel Lyon to explore the latest in global cybersecurity news, trending topics, and industry transformation initiatives impacting governments, enterprises, and our way of life. Now, let's get to the point.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point Podcast. I'm Rachel Lyon, here with my co-host, Eric Trexler. Eric, exciting day.
Good afternoon, Rachel. Rachel, I know we're opening the show, but we were just talking about the countdown from 6.
Yes.
On the Riverside platform. Did it just count down from 5?
I missed it. I was focused on getting mentally ready for I was getting in character, so I missed it.
Okay, we'll go back to our listeners. For our listeners who aren't aware, I've been confused for the last couple of years. We use this platform that starts a countdown from the number 6, and I cannot figure it out. If anybody understands why, email us. I'll send you a $100 gift certificate. But good afternoon, Rachel.
Good afternoon. And can we talk about how excited I am for today's guest? I mean, we have a real gem, and I can't wait to jump into it. So welcome to the podcast, Tony Sager. He's Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist for the Center of Internet Security. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, Rachel. Great to reconnect with you, Eric.
Hold on a second, Rachel. I don't think you're doing Tony justice. We're not going to read his entire bio, but
I know
Tony,
it's so impressive. I was figured we would sprinkle it in throughout the conversation. I don't want to embarrass him, but it is kind of incredible.
It's this incredible bio, Tony. How many years did you spend up at NSA, Tony?
Just short of 35 years there.
We're going to give you the extra couple months because we appreciate your service to the country.
Yes.
A fellow podcaster. You have, 36 episodes out on the Cybersecurity Where Are You podcast, which I listened to 3 episodes this morning alone. I was driving up to New York, and what a great content. So, Tony, thank you for joining us.
What's so fantastic, Tony. I mean, in your time in cybersecurity, before there was cybersecurity, you've really seen the gamut of change and evolution. And I was reading a blog of yours. I think it was from February when you were talking about the Cyber Safety Review Board, and that was being announced, and you were joining the board. And I really love this characterization of wizardry that you talked about in cybersecurity. I would love if you could share that with our listeners, because I found that fascinating.
Well, thank you for reading that, number one, Rachel. But yeah, it's a phrase I've been using here recently. Wizardry is the model that I grew up in, right? This idea of brilliant people inventing the right, perfect, mathematically verifiable technology for operating systems, and so forth. And there's a lot of great technology, a lot of brilliant people, that preceded me, believe me, in terms of the basics of computer security, computer science, networking security, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how I made my living, right? I grew up among these really smart people, great ideas and all that stuff. But it occurred to me at some point in my career, as I got more and more into testing, people are really impressed by security wizards, but they almost never do what we recommend that they should do. They're really impressed. Right. And so in the context of my work, right? Testing a network system, finding all these flaws, you give a lovely bit of PowerPoint to the general. Oh my gosh, it's so cool and great. And he turns to his poor IT people who are underfunded, under-equipped, and going, right. Yet another report of stuff that we know we need to fix, but we can't afford to, or the boss won't pay attention to it. And so what I say is that wizardry is a great thing, right? It's great that we have smart people involved with this. But wizardry turns out to be better for job security for old guys like me, and it's not very good public policy, right? You can't really run a country or an economy on wizardry, because if you treat the bad guy in particular as a wizard or a magician, your only defense is to hire your own magicians, and they're in kind of short supply, and you have to pay them a lot. And they speak funny language, and this idea of treating this as wizardry has gotten us to a certain point. But what's happening, I think, in the big sense across the industry, and it's a healthy thing. It's uncomfortable for old wizards, by the way, but it's the right answer. Yes. Is we don't ask for wizardry so I can safely buy a lamp without getting electrocuted, or so I can fly on a plane, or that I can worry about public health, right? We build a lot of the risk management into our kind of decision-making infrastructure. We codify things. We certify people. We establish a body of knowledge. We certify products. We have building codes. All this kind of stuff is there to help us manage risk. And that's where, that's what the big shift we've seen over the last few years in the industry, right? Everybody's a cyber person now. They just don't know what they're supposed to be doing, right? Lawyers and insurance companies and regulators and so forth. So it's important to get the historical context. Again, we need many more wizards. There's a phrase I used to use in my talks. We got plenty of wizards. We need more mechanics. We need security mechanics to build the stuff that we have not put in place yet. So that's where that comes from. It's this, it was part of me growing up in the business, right? To say, you grow up in a certain model and then you realize, but we're not really changing things at the rate we need to so we can function as a society. So what am I missing? It was about that transition for me personally, and then my observation of the industry.
Tony, I have a question for you. You'd say it makes the wizards uncomfortable. What are they uncomfortable about? Well,
wizardry, I guess, and I joke about it, but it's actually kind of true, right? That there's a certain prestige that comes with being a wizard. They have to pay you well, and the boss doesn't really understand you, but he needs you. And so there's a position that you have in the sort of pecking order of jobs and your role in the organization. So there's a discomfort with that when that is threatened. There's a blog thing I'm working on, Rachel, you might enjoy.
Okay.
Look for it in the next few weeks, where, and I say this with great affection, right? I grew up in this business, but security wizards sometimes are better at managing their own risk than they are at helping everybody else manage theirs. So what is this risk they're managing? What's the loss of prestige of the risk, right? The loss of high-paying jobs. A lot of it, though, is about the risk of being wrong. So you ask me for my advice, I tell you to do this. But I don't like to be wrong. So I'm going to tell you to do this, that, and the other thing, right? I'm going to give you, you're going to do 100 things? I'm going to give you a list of 150 things. So that's how in the industry we wind up with these gigantic control catalogs and complex frameworks and all this stuff. There's a natural conservatism that comes with this, right? I don't want to be wrong. And if something does go wrong, I don't want to be the one that said, you didn't tell us about, so-and-so. So I say it in jest, but I really mean it seriously. There's a kind of a risk management equation at play here, right? At the end of the day, it's not my risk. I get it. I like prestigious jobs. I like to get paid. But at the end of the day, we're trying to manage other people's risk. And so what do they need to make a decision? Not what do I need to make me feel better about what I've said. So I think you get the point there, right? It's really something that we all need to be thinking about here. Again, at the end of the day, this is about how do you as a citizen make decisions that are inherently risky. To fly, to drive across a bridge, to eat food at a commercial facility. You don't become an expert in all those things, right? You count on, people are certified, knowledge has been codified into building codes or whatever the model happens to be. So, I'm a bit of a liberal arts mathematician too. So I studied history a lot, and looking at the history of how we wound up with safety things, right? How we develop mechanisms of public policy or civil engineering or medical practice and all that kind of stuff. I think it's an important lesson for all of us in this, new IT-oriented cyber age.
So really, if I can paraphrase, just to make sure I understand it, it's almost the democratization of cybersecurity. As more people join the community, as more people know more, those extreme wizards, those experts feel somewhat threatened because they're not the end-all, be-all. Is that what you're saying, though, or
demystifying a bit?
Yeah, I refer to it.
Pulling the curtains back?
Yeah, I call it the mainstreaming. That's probably not a great term for that. Again,
but I know what you mean there.
Yeah, it's putting this important work. Again, please, I love wizards, right? I grew up around them. But it's putting their work in context, right? It's not enough. So the naive model, that I grew up in. I know I have a really, say in the military context, right? I have this network that supports my military operations. I got to make sure that the bad guys can't do it. What am I going to do? I'm going to bring in these smart folks from NSA or wherever I bring them into, and they're going to hack and attack, pretend to be the bad guy. They're going to give me a list of things they found, and I'm going to fix them, and it'll all be good, and we'll move on, right? Well, we've all learned over time, any problem you find is just a symptom of larger problems. And that was what
Yes.
if there was a kind of a neat virtue to my career, and roughly speaking, I came into a place that was just an extraordinarily interesting place for its time, where this cyber stuff kind of grew up. And the first third of my career, and just for context, I'm sorry, my career has been sort of working for defense, but being one of the pretend bad guys, right? So, if you have a system that has where there's a lot of risk involved, and you're wondering, geez, what are the bad guys thinking, and how might they take advantage of this, or undo me, or get around me? But those bad guys won't actually tell me what they're going to do. I better hire my own pretend bad guys to go look at this. And we call that in the business red teaming and black hats and all that kind of stuff. So I was lucky enough to come into that, starting primarily in math and then in computer science. So roughly speaking, the first third of my career was learning this technical craft, which at that time was really NSA or inside government. And that's kind of where the action was there. The middle third was around moving into management. So getting to see lots of this kind of work at scale. And just, I think at one point, and I say this very, very humbly, I might have been running the biggest vulnerability finding machine for defense in the U.S. government, which gave me insight into
I'm sure you were.
Well, and seeing lots of things fail, right? How we could pretend to make them fail. But, I can say with a straight face, I'm one of the few lifelong defenders who spent most of his career inside an intelligence agency. So that, again, at that time, that let you see what nations do to each other. How we go after other people, how they come after us, how they go after each other.
Yes.
And so I got to see a lot of failure at scale. And what really struck me was I'm just seeing the same things over and over again. Whether we go find it or they go find it or they find it in somebody else. A lot of this was just, it wasn't like millions of unique attacks happening every day. It was millions of repeats of kind of the same old garbage over and over and over again. Like, what's going on here? Are we not learning? So that was tied into what we talked about earlier, right? Realizing, if just pointing out vulnerabilities was the key to fixing them, I should have been out of work 20 years ago, right? The idea was, if I just bring in these hot shots, they point out my problems, I'll be inspired or scared or something, and we'll go fix them. And much to my surprise, once I got to see this at scale, I'm like, wait a minute, it's not inspiring people. It's not scaring them, and they just get overwhelmed by it. It's just more noise in their day. And these are complex networks doing expensive, risky things. And and business owners or military leaders have lots to worry about, right? They're not breathlessly waiting for me to tell them what to do. They got 100 other things they're trying to juggle. So clearly something was missing in the basic industry model of, find flaws, inform people, walk away with no responsibility to fix it. That's the best job ever. I mean, that's the job I had. If you can get that gig, man, you should take it because it's great prestige. It's great fun. You're around really clever people. People appreciate what you do. But it turned out that by itself was not enough to fix those problems, right? So that thought, just to finish up, was I just felt so lucky to be in such a unique place, right? To learn the technical craft, but then to have the opportunity to see across all these different sorts of jobs and, again, what was happening at the national level to get to work with the vendors. So first third of my career, learning technical craft. Second third, sort of, seeing things at scale. And I have to be honest, I spent the last third of my NSA career going, what are we doing wrong? Why are we seeing these same problems over and over again? And it had to do with, this observation. Just knowing about a problem doesn't get it fixed by itself, because fixing things is about incentives. It's about authority. It's about how I buy stuff, how I operate it. So that became kind of my quest for that last third. I was still running the vulnerability analysis stuff at NSA, but really kind of focused on how do I create knowledge from this testing and analysis that can drive more directly the solutions. And how do I talk to policymakers, to the industry, to standards organizations, and put more information out there that can prevent the problems that we're finding, And so that was part of the, the discomfort of wizards too, right? You hire great people, you train them to be on the red team, for example, go find more problems. The goal is that, it shouldn't take a national class asset to go and find that patches are missing, that our configurations are sloppy, that we have not managed changed well or administrative privilege well, right? That's a lesson that we all know. Now, sometimes what I tell people is that the early days of red taping, we actually kind of forget why we were doing it back then. And I call it the drama. We need a good story. Right? You have to convince the senior decision makers and the generals that they have a problem. Therefore, we need drama. We need to, your military operations won't execute. And drama's, and that's a noble purpose. But we keep doing it, right? By itself, it doesn't produce enough information to actually solve the problem. What is still, you're doing it for a legit reason, right? To inspire people to do something, but to actually create information that would drive policy, that would drive purchasing, is a different class of problems. And so if you don't connect those, then you don't really take you down the solutions path. And I can tell you what happened was, so the NSA Red Team worked for another organization, a Navy captain, and the Blue Team. So the Red Team, pretend to be adversaries, nobody knows you're coming, et cetera, et cetera. The Blue Team worked for me, the friendly face. They show up, hey, how are you doing? Let's scan your systems and we can work together. And it was so broken back in these early days that there was a well-known thing that can't be explained in public, but the Red Team had found this particular problem, scared everybody to death across a really large swath of the government. And guess who was tasked to go fix the problem? My Blue Team. And so I go to the Navy captain, hey, I know something about this problem. Can my team get briefed in so they know what to do? And he goes, sorry, you're not authorized to hear the problem. I said, but we're supposed to go fix the problem. And he would say, I know what you mean, but, and he really meant it. He said, no, the senior person at the Pentagon, this big guy, said, close hold. No one else should know. And I said, well, how do I get invited to a meeting with this guy? I can't believe he's an idiot. He wants this problem fixed, and he wants NSA to bring every tool it's got to bear. Well, I happened to meet this guy and become friends with him years later. And he laughed uproariously when he heard this story. He said, of course I wanted everybody that could fix this to know about it. But it was a sign of the times. The idea was, oh my gosh, here's a problem in a live DoD system. We can't let anybody know, right? And so what I also observed was back in those days, right? That we were actually by over close holding, right, or by holding the information too closely, we were actually crippling the defense. We were not crippling the bad guys. They know what we have. They know what we're running, right? They've done their homework and their reconnaissance. And so this idea of how do I openly share this in a way that makes sense and can really empower defense. And some of that was the reasoning behind, I don't know if you followed, I mean, this is sort of lost to history now, but it was in June of 2001. So as an outgrowth of all the security testing, really clever people that worked in our group put together what we called then the NSA security guides. Here's what we think is the best way to configure a Windows desktop or a web server, mail server, et cetera. I got permission to release that to the public in June of 2001 through the early days of NSA.gov. And that was more than just like being a nice person, right? The idea was, again, given the background I was growing up in, I thought the Defense Department is never going to solve this problem by itself. And there was also very conscious activity to, for example, outsource a lot of non-warfighting functions to commercial suppliers or to allies or to other people, right? So our perimeter was disappearing. So there's no nice, neat, tidy, let's secure the Defense Department. It's, wait a minute, how about all our suppliers? No one gets paid in the DoD. No goods get moved to the right spot without commercial friends, right? All these things are happening for all kinds of good economic reasons.
Yes.
But now you've essentially dissolved your perimeter. We have to help everyone get better. And that's just the nature of this, universal connection, this network that we all live on. I was seeing that, late 90s, early 2000s. So 2001 was a big watershed event for us to both put this content in the public, but I also wanted to open up what we were doing in a way that was very, and also observed at the time, open source was really taking off. And the idea was, the government isn't going to pay everybody to fix this. We're going to have to find market-friendly, community ways to improve everybody. And so if we wanted to be out there participating, we had to bring our share. And so our share was, we've developed all this work. We're going to put it out there. Okay. And this is what we do. And this is our contribution to the cause, was the way that I thought of it. And that turned out, if I made one good call in my career, that was it. It was to really push this idea of let's get outside the building. Let's share what we're doing. And we always got back more than we gave. I mean, that turned out to be, people appreciated the mysterious, back then it was mysterious NSA, being out there in the public to participate in standards groups, to provide content, to go to industry events and give talks. And so it was a really, I think, a sea change in the way we approached the mission. And again, I had a part in that just based upon what I described, which is realizing we're not going to solve this through red teaming, right? That's just a data point that allows us to understand something that we then have to translate into action.
And to this day, if you go to NSA.gov, the NSA is still releasing information for the betterment of the public, right? Where you can get information and understand how to better protect your systems and why. So that's continuing today, Tony.
Yeah, I watched that carefully also, Eric, because it feels really good. And many of these, and I'll say this if you don't mind, kids that came up in our group. So
kids like you, Rachel.
No, they are the real leaders there now. And it is so amazing to see all the great work, the public-facing things that they're doing out there, giving talks at conferences, participating, and watching the behavior in government. Right, a lot more if you watch this sort of thing. A lot more joint work between the folks at DHS, CISA, FBI, very openly, publicly working together around incidents, bad guys, reports on what's going on, advisories for this and that and the other. That was just, I can't tell you how good that feels as an alum to look back and see the momentum there. So when I mentioned we released the security guidance to the public in 2001, that was also around the time, if you know a thing called Security Enhanced Linux, that came out, I think, December of 2000, not from my group, but from the R&D folks down the hall. So it was kind of a race to say who could be more involved in the public. And the guy that was the chief back then once said, we were first, Tony. I said, yeah, but we blew you away in terms of downloads. That SE Linux stuff is only for the really serious practitioner, mathematically minded folks there. But the spirit of it back then in the early 2000s was about openness, sharing, and how do we translate all this into action?
Yeah.
And Tony, it's 2022 right now as we're recording. The adversary has clearly become more funded, more incentivized. A lot more information is out there. You've talked about the government working better together. People have become much more knowledgeable. There are more wizards. There are more different levels of wizardry. How are we doing, in your opinion? Like, what would is there anything you would have changed? But what's working, what's not?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, you have a challenge, right? And everyone can find great examples of working together. There's lots of good stories. But some days it feels like the problem's getting worse faster than we're getting better. And so I'm a bit of a hopeless optimist, right? You can't work for defense for decades without being a hopeless optimist, right? You love that kind of challenge. But so there are great signs and great opportunities for working together, and great progress in a lot of ways. But I for a long time it felt not as optimistic as that. I used to joke in my talks, it wasn't quite a joke, if you want to see capitalism in action, look at the bad guys, not the good guys. Right. So it was this what you saw for folks that follow criminality, right? This this is where criminals are going to go because this is a classic. That's where the money is. And did you ever? There's a quote from a friend that I use with permission. If you know the name, Sean Henry at CrowdStrike. Yep. So Sean's been around. He's a wonderful guy. He was essentially the first cyber executive at the FBI. And he was once quoted in the paper, and it was so good. I called him up and said, "Did you really say this, Sean? Can I use it with attribution?" He said, "Of course you can." So the quote is something like this: anyone, and this was long, long ago, because anyone in organized crime who's not moving into this cyber stuff ought to be sued for malpractice. Right. And it was so good. So I called him out. "Did you really say?" He says, "Yeah, of course I did." He said, "Why would you run into a bank, draw a gun, and put your life at risk, for when you could do this over the wire for a couple
keystrokes?"
Yeah, and much less risk, much greater return. And he says something like this. I don't remember the exact words, but something like this. And even if you're not smart enough to do it yourself, you're certainly nasty enough to kidnap somebody and force them to do it for you. So, but it's a reminder that, right, this is not going away. This is where the money is. This is where our national treasure is. This is where your personal fortune is, or whatever information the bad guys want. So this is going to happen no matter what. And then you saw the rise of criminality. We're in the midst of the rise of criminality. And you also see things like specialization, right? There's the very Darwinian, only the strong survive. Yes. You see the natural specialization, tool builders, reconnaissance, money, how do I monetize this? And so you see a lot of sort of natural, what we think of as economic optimization happening right across the criminal enterprise. And
that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And so it's, and then you look at that, well, wait a minute, and I gave again, a bit out of date example of how we, with good intentions, did not share potentially useful defensive information. And all we did was cripple the defense, not the bad guys, right? So that we're still struggling with some of these issues across our own industry around the sharing of incidents, right? And a lot of the things we've gotten over. Right? It used to be in the early days was, oh my gosh, this embarrassment of we've been hacked. Oh. Well, if you haven't been hacked, you're not paying attention. So there's a lot more kind of acceptance of the problem and awareness that there's a common problem and therefore a common good to be had here. So we have seen progress in that, but I'd say there's still a ways to go in kind of recognizing what might be the most useful things for us to do socially so that we can deal with this problem at scale. These are classic community-wide problems, right? No company gets to solve this problem by themselves or for themselves. The government can't solve it by itself or for itself. And so it naturally leads us to these kinds of really systemic, complicated, problems where you don't get to change one thing. You have to change a lot of things in order to make any progress. Now, to take us back to the topic of the Cyber Safety Review Board, that was one of the issues we were grappling with. You have lists of recommendations, but a lot of these are systemic kinds of things that they don't neatly, do A, then B, then C, then D. It's do a lot of things, and a number of them are long-term events that you could. And by the way, we've been staring at some of these long-term things for decades, and they don't age well. So someday you have to get started. And so we have to see how do we take some of these lessons and translate them both into things we do short-term, but also the things that we need to do longer term.
So Tony, going back to the Cyber Safety Review Board, we've got 15 distinguished members of the board that picked Log4j as the first event. Would you call it event, or what would you call it? The first activity, maybe, to review?
I think I forgot we called it exactly. Let me just glance at that. Review of the event, we called it. Right.
Okay, so the first major event, and from what I've heard, one of the nice things about Log4j is it wasn't like Sunburst where there were specific companies involved. It's kind of all-encompassing. It hits everybody. We had a friend of the show on, Mr. Ford, correct, Rachel, who said Log4j is going to be the most cataclysmic cybersecurity event of our time.
Right.
That was his prediction back in December of, 21, I guess, when it first came out. Based on its prevalence in Java code, and everybody's using Log4j pretty much was the answer. So you pick Log4j, the team goes out and does the research, includes a massive part of industry, and you come back with an understanding of what happened, how it happened, and I think it breaks down into a couple of sections, right? Really understanding, the factual information, the findings and conclusions, and then the recommendations.
Yes.
And there are 19 recommendations. And they're pretty good recommendations from my opinion. How do we get out? How do we get the world going back to not just red teaming it? We understand what's happening now and nobody does anything. How do we get the world to listen?
Well, you're going to give me an easy one to start with.
No. This is a professional podcast. We got to have hard-hitting questions.
I love it. So, and just to clarify one thing, so the board doesn't pick the problem to be solved. That really is tasked given to us from, I believe in this case, it was from Director Jen Easterly. So we are
okay.
There is discussion about appropriate problems, but at the end of the day, the
so
board is.
CISA says, I want you to go out and I want you to help us with this.
Right. So a choice is made, and there's a legal mechanism that sort of in the charter that allows that to happen. But and so the board is chosen. There's a group of industry folks and a group of government folks, and support and infrastructure is provided by CISA to help us with the research and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And I will say when Log4j came up, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure that'll be that great an example. And it turned out to be a really great example from my perspective. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it was so all-encompassing that it was a chance to look at a lot of things, both in its sort of immediate sense and as symptoms of larger problems or challenges that the nation has, or that the whole economy has around this. And so that, it just, in hindsight, as we got towards the end, I thought, boy, this has really been a rich discussion and really interesting, and let us talk about a lot of really important problems. So I think that the choice was wise. It certainly wasn't my choice to do this one, but I think in hindsight, it really felt right to me. It also, and thank you, Rachel. You mentioned having looked at my blog. I wrote a prequel deliberately before we started because I wanted to say, what do I think we're going to see, and not to prejudge or to be biased, but to kind of look at it with a historical eye, right? That is, and I think I said something like, I'll be startled if there's some technical result that we haven't thought about many times before. Right. And that's not to downplay the importance or the relevancy of the problem. It was just my impression that, we've seen a lot of things happen in this industry over decades, and a lot of really bright people have looked at this. So it's hard to imagine some unique thing that would appear. And I think that turned out to be true. And I also said we're going to see illustrations of really deep systemic, universal problems. And I think that was certainly true also. So, but I would just to say a word or two. And the deliberations of the board are private to the board. Right. But I can share with you just what an amazing group of people, and lively discussion and great cooperation from the people that we asked, by and large, for information. So, the rough model was the National Transportation Safety Board, right? Which is long established, and that's good because it gives you a kind of a visual or an image that we work towards. And it also is bad because it doesn't fit 100% in this cyber business, right? There's no, wreckage to be reassembled. You're not going to find, a violation of a building code, an acceptable building code, or weakness in the rivets or whatever, turns out to be the cause. So it doesn't end, right? There's no, you look at reconstruct an accident, and you can either reinforce or get new information about, all the mechanisms that manage risk in this whatever the element of transportation is involved here. And here we have much more complicated, a gazillion variables, lots of behavior, no accepted standards for, how is a piece of software written, how is it operationalized, and all that. So really kind of messy problem. So that's the downside of having a kind of an image like that. But anyway, a great job of sort of pulling all that together. I said in the prequel, what would be really valuable is the chance to really study something in detail and put it into context, because we're all getting a little burned out on this cyber fatigue thing, right? If Log4j, whatever, SolarWinds, there'll be another one next month, next week, next quarter that will consume our attention. Massive amount of information flowing in from threat analysts and the industry and the government, and we'll just be flooded with that. And people will scramble, and they'll be on to the next one. Right. So it's rare to have this kind of collection of people with this sort of national attention spend a little extra time, dig into these. So I really enjoyed being part of that. That's why I agreed to be a part of this this activity, because I just thought it would be a rare opportunity to really look at something with a with a not say leisurely, but a more practiced and thoughtful eye to what is really going on here, and what are the mix of things we need to do now and things that we need to get started that have longer tails to them. So all that, the recommendations, I'm sure that every person on the committee would say, we stand behind the work. We're really proud of what we did. Anyone, and not all of us cared equally or knew equally about every issue and every recommendation that was in there. But a lot of great learning. I felt I learned a lot from lots of different folks, and contributed a little to some of these ideas and help bring them in. So at the end of the day, it's a work by committee, but I think a lot of interaction and a lot of great discussion and a lot of really good intent. I mean, everybody that was there, is someone who's got a significant role in the industry and feels a great sense of ownership about trying to solve these problems.
That's important. I think one of the things, Black Hat's going on this week, and I think there were some folks talking about the report. And one of the things that had come out of it with the software bill of materials, which I thought was really interesting. That's come up in the past on the show too. Asset management, asset inventory. How did you guys get to that kind of perspective?
Yeah, boy, the bill of materials, SBOM, as it's known, is one of the things that's in there. And what I will share with you, here's my perspective on it. Some of that's in the report, and again, I can't go into any details about the report, but I can tell you my sort of philosophy that drives this. At the end of the day, we all are making really high risk decisions at multiple points, whether we know it or not. So the decision to integrate a piece, and modern software and systems today aren't really created from scratch. They're mostly composed of pieces. Right? That's what allows us to have scale and a worldwide network. And so you take that down
and
to the level of
Log4j everywhere.
Well, exactly. And so
it's a piece. Everybody used it.
Right.
I mean, what lets us, have this amazing. Right. This is an amazing time to be alive in terms of information sharing infrastructure. But a lot of that is empowered by the reuse of things, bits of code and use of protocols, so we can standardize the way things talk to each other. So at a code level, the decision to integrate someone else's code, whether it came from a commercial source, open source, a partner, is actually a pretty risky decision.
Right,
but we often make those decisions. Either we don't realize we're making that decision, or we're making it with really weak information.
Right.
Okay, so SBOM is really aimed at a problem, sort of conceptually, right? That is, what do I know about the security, the integrity, the quality of something I'm bringing in, which could have many downstream implications for risks later. So SBOM is about transparency, right? What are the pieces that made up the piece of code that I'm integrating in that will be reflected later in other decisions. And other people are going to take other pieces of code, pull them together with hardware, with what is the business mission of this? What kind of data is it going to hold? All that stuff, and pull all that together. So I always try not to get hung up on is it SBOM or not? Is the real question is, what does that mechanism, does it provide me information to make these risk decisions down the road? And then going at it from the other direction, right? So there's a tendency in the industry, I'm sure this will shock both of you, to over-engineer things. And I won't give any examples because people's feelings will be hurt here. But, when in doubt about building like a standard or a programming interface or whatever, we tend to, again, this is a natural conservatism in security. When in doubt, try to solve every problem in every use case. And, I got my favorite thing. So if you take that approach, you get really gigantic, ponderous things that the vendors will never build, or they'll build, there's enough fuzz in it.
Tony, I'm with you. I mean, I'm not a developer, but I'm just not smart enough to take the 452 recommendations or the guidance that NIST gives out on a 3,000 page document on the proper way to do things.
And that's what
I know it's the right thing, but
the fog
it's
of
just
war,
overwhelming.
Right, Eric? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
Fog of War.
Yeah, thanks for the reference, Rachel. Yeah, the Fog of War was a talk I gave, I forget, some years ago, 2014 or something, maybe 2012. I forget, after I retired. But I was trying to come up with a way to convey. So here's the irony. Again, I'm speaking as an old guy in this, right? That it struck me that our problem is the problem in the early days was I don't have any defensive tools. I don't have any visibility. I don't have any, what am I going to do? There's nothing to help me defend myself. The problem today is actually the opposite. We have too many.
Too many, yeah.
It's not the lack of tools or training or certifications or threat feeds or anything. It's that the typical enterprise is overwhelmed. We're not empowering defense. We're overwhelming it, right? You can't make sense of it all. It's too much. And, and there's lots of reasons for this, right? Bad guys are good at being bad guys. So they're very determined. There's a lot to be done. The technology is risky. When it was designed, we weren't sure, what it was going to be used for. Who would have thought, like the internet we have today, you would never have designed it this way if you thought it was going to be the economic backbone for the future of our nation, right? You would have built something radically different. And the designers of the original internet were not designing to build the economic backbone of the future of our nation. So, it came that way. And now here we are trying to retrofit security as we know it today, in a really complicated environment. So this complexity of, so we have a different problem. We're overwhelming defenses, giant control catalogs and really complicated risk management frameworks, right? So people are overwhelmed by this. And that was the point I was trying to make with that talk, is that, it's the more, and the pun is the fog of war, right? That term that was used from Clausewitz, and the title came from, I turned to my bookshelf and I saw it was Lifting the Fog of War, was a well-known book in the DoD back in the day about the early days of what we then called quietly the information age, and the availability of all this commercial. Remember when warfighting shifted to something you watched on CNN? Right, that was like, oh my God! Instead of government unique special sensors telling us what's going on, it becomes sort of open public knowledge. But so that was the point I was trying to make there. And if you don't mind a bit of a slight branch here, I that really started to chew on me. Again, towards the end of my career, how do I help simplify this problem, as opposed to produce more information that just adds to the confusion? And even things I mentioned, I'm very proud of, right? The release of the NSA security guides to the public by our team. In some sense, that's more fog. Do I trust the NSA guides or the NIST checklist or the CIS benchmarks or the vendors checklist? Right? How do they sort through all that?
Right.
So that's one of the origin points of the work that I'm still involved with, the Center for Internet Security, the CIS controls. And there's a bit of a comic book superhero origin story of that. This thing is now a worldwide, thing. I would love to tell you I had this grand vision of the future and what was important, but of course none of that's true. I was just struggling with this. So once we released this stuff to the public, that actually started my public speaking career, much to my surprise, because one does not go to NSA to speak in the public. And so, but we kept getting requests for interviews and that kind of stuff. And so I find myself out there, and proudly telling the story of what we did this and what we did, and here to help you, rah, rah, rah. And people started to ask me a question that I'd never really pondered. This is so embarrassing, but I'm going to share it with you guys and your audience anyway. And they would say things like, "Oh, that's great. Thanks very much, Tony. What do I do first?" What? What do I do first? Thanks for your.
Where do I start?
What do I? I'm going, oh man. And here's my character flaw revealed to you. See, I was never responsible to fix these problems, right? What do I do first is the question from someone who owns the problem, who's got to solve it, right? Because you got a boss, you got a budget, you got regulators looking over your shoulder. And I'm going, well, we told you what to do. There's NIST stuff and NSA stuff and DISA stuff, and you can, but what do I do first? I can't read thousands of pages of stuff and decide what applies to me. Wow, you know what? That's actually a great question. And at some point, I came back, and I true story, I gathered 5 friends, and most of my friends are pretty extraordinary. So these are not ordinary people. These are, the tech leader of the red team and blue team and that kind of really smart people. And here's what I told them. No one leaves the room until we all agree on a small number of things that all of our friends should do.
Wow.
All right. And I will not allow you to solve world hunger or peace in our time at this meeting, because that's what security people do. Right. So you put us together and you know about 20 flaws and things to do. Well, I know 5 more. Well, I'm going to one up you. I know 5. That's how you get these gigantic recommendation lists and so forth. And I said, no, small number. And to me, small is 5 to 7. 5 to 7 things. Let's argue until we get to 5 to 7. And
Tony, to me, it's 1 to 3.
I know. Well, guess what?
Does that say something about me?
Well, maybe it does, Eric.
I think you were. I think you missed some of your audience there. If I was in it.
Sorry about that. Well, I couldn't get them to agree to 5 to 7. Just to let you know, we came
boy.
up with a list of 10, and the list of 10 was on 2 pages. That's it. It was a letter that went, and I sent it to friends at the Pentagon and CIO of the Air Force and things like that. And all it said was, based on our experience, if you don't know where to start here. What's the
I think
core?
that's great.
What's the foundation? Wonderful. And I was trying to just be helpful, right? In a low key, because I just wanted to answer this question: what do I do first? And so we sent it. Never thought another word about it. And the team leader, he peeks in my door one day, a couple months later. He goes, "If you know the name Alan Powler, the late Alan Powler, was the founder of the SANS Institute." And he says, he leans in my door and he goes, "Hey." Tony, Alan got a hold of our list, and he wants to know if he can build a community service project out of it. And if you're familiar with the SANS Institute, they do nothing at small scale. Yeah. They're a big machine. And so a 2-page thing, and I said, of course, it wasn't classified or anything, obviously. And I said, but let me talk to our lawyers to make sure that we can stay involved and be part of the team. And then, so it turns from a 2-page list to a thing, right? And with classes and conferences and posters and all that kind of stuff. And but the whole theory of the case or the philosophy is the important thing, right? It's, can I simplify? And to simplify, you don't want to just be simple. You want to be simple with meaning, right? The goal is not to give something trivial to people, but it's a starting point. How do I build? What do I get going on? So you want it to be intellectually defendable and part of a bigger stream, because no 10 things are going to solve world hunger or peace in our time or cybersecurity, but you want to get them on the right path. And that was the notion there that we have tried to preserve, and is really a bedrock philosophy for what we're doing here is, and you have to believe the philosophy, right? You have to believe the principle, and not everybody does. Wizards don't, right? Yeah. I grew up in the business where everybody's a special snowflake, right? The thing we learned in kindergarten or whatever, you're special. Yeah, we are, but in cyberspace, and my firstborn is an English major, and she tells me my grammar is off and off. But take it for what it will. What I say is, in cyberspace, we all have more in common than we do that's different, right? We're essentially using roughly the same technology on the same network. We're interlocked in these complicated business relationships that we don't even understand, and it's constantly changing. And so the bad news is we have this shared problem, right? One vulnerability in a Log4j suddenly ripples across a gazillion machines. And so that's bad, shared problem. But shared problem is also a chance for shared action, for shared opportunity, right? To say, yeah, but some of these problems are not unique to you. They're in fact systemic. They affect everybody. That gives us the opportunity, if you're an optimist, like some of us, to focus our attention there. And every, I think, responsible analysis that I could do, that we could do back in my day, around what is the real root cause or the nature of the attacks, the successful attacks that we have seen. I think this is a classic 80-20 rule kind of a thing. Most of our attacks we see are actually based on a relatively small number of the same things over and over again. I've said that before. And so the goal is, can I identify a small number of things that give me good value, that provide the foundation for defense? That's really the tricky exercise here. And if you'll pardon one more riff, I often say, we talk about share, right? Share is the most important verb in cybersecurity. Oh, share incidents, share this. I get it, but I'm going to sound like a curmudgeon here, so forgive me. I have a talk I used to give. This will get you fired in the DC Beltway area. Sharing is overrated in cyber defense. Right? That was the title. And it's not because I'm a bad person or a curmudgeon, right? But people forget, we don't share just for sharing's sake. Right. The point is to share so that people know how to take action. What should I do? I contend the real verb that matters is not share, it's translate. How do I translate millions of data points about badness into a relatively small number of positive, constructive things that you can do about it? That's why you would want to take all this threat information in and subscribe to threat feeds and read all these threat reports. But guess what? The average enterprise, in fact, the majority of enterprises in our economy don't have a threat analyst in their company, right? I mean, they don't. They can't read these threat reports. They're not going to, you can send them all the indicators of compromise and stuff you want. They can't do anything.
They don't know what to do with them.
Right. And so the translate verb is the one that really matters, right? Can I pull together expertise, translate millions of bad things into a smaller number of positive, constructive things? And that's this, you have to stretch a little bit, but this is not unlike public health, right? You can't absorb all the data about pandemics and the transmission vectors of disease. We have to translate that into behaviors. Wash your hands, get your shots, avoid these kinds of encounters or locations or whatever. Those are translations of fancy science and really smart people in the back room into behaviors that we can all understand. And sometimes the science changes, right? And therefore we translate into different behaviors. Remember, wash your hands, and they'd be, how long do I wash my hands? And, is it mostly airborne? Is it, contact driven? Do I have to wash my groceries? Or, it hasn't been a very efficient process, say, relative to the current pandemic, but, those are in the fancy words, those are a translation of science into behaviors. And that's what we do in many other endeavors here. So anyway, so this notion of having grown up in big government agencies, and then, and I had the chance, which was unusual at the time at NSA, to work with lots of friends in the industry, to make a lot of friends and to do a lot of cooperative voluntary work. But really seeing it in action, especially here at the Center for Internet Security, the power of volunteerism, the willingness of people to contribute to common cause and create, when I first spun out into the earlier nonprofit that we merged into CIS, my partner then was Dr. Jane Lute, who was number 2 at Homeland Security. And we were talking about workforce issues. And I said, Jane, my experience in the industry is there's so many great people of goodwill who will contribute their time. All they need is a little bit of structure to point them in the right direction, to create a product, to set a deadline, to manage it. If we could just provide that, that's a really powerful engine in and of itself. We don't have to be a big company. We can be a modest-sized company that really helps provide this. The tagline I use sometimes is, if you really want to get the best value from free labor, it doesn't come for free. You need a professional team to organize it, right? To bring it structure, to publish the documents, to manage the interaction with vendors and all that kind of stuff. And then really that's what we do at CIS.
Tony, I want to go back to something you said. You were talking about sharing, and then you said really it's translate. Yes. Right, because sharing for sharing purposes. I think there's a piece there that I'll call simplify, and I'll use a great example from CISA. I think lately what Chris Krebs and Jen Easterly and their teams have done coming out of DHS has been magnificent. Getting back to the basics, right? The shields up, simplify, right? This is why. Making it simple. Right. The most impactful thing for me, and this isn't a CISA commercial, maybe it is, I don't know. Like the 4 things you can do to keep yourself cyber safe. And I think I've used that with companies. I've used that with government agencies. I've used that with people. My father, Rachel, multi-factor authentication. Come on. Are you using it yet? Nope. Not yet, huh? But simplify, right? What do? Multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Update your software. So we're talking patching, basics, enterprise, individual, doesn't matter. Update. Think before you click. And then use strong password. Use password managers. They're simple. They're actionable. Everybody can do it. And I think if you look at the Log4j output from the Cyber Safety Review Board, you look at a lot of the work you've done over your career, they're basic things that can fix big parts of the problem. But I'd love your thoughts.
No, I'm 100% agreeing with you. I think that security is an area, and I mentioned the kind of natural conservatism, right? If you have a career like mine, there's a certain level of kind of paranoia that gets delivered with it, because you get to see the worst.
Exactly.
You see how systems get employed, and I get it, but you can either let that empower you or paralyze you. And too often it paralyzes us, right? There's nothing I can do. I'm helpless.
Or it's overwhelming.
I can't tell you how many really senior.
It's overwhelming. I'm out.
Right, exactly.
I don't know where to to your point, I don't know where to start.
Right. And if we don't present well, so this is what I realized, that many a senior decision maker, say in uniform with stars on their shoulder, will say things like, okay, I hear everybody, I accept the risk. We're gonna go. Well, in cyberspace, that's not a knowing acceptance of risk. It's a frustration acceptance of risk, because these IT wizards won't help me. And so they just go, right? So that's irrelevancy. You might be technically right, but you haven't helped the mission. And so that's where I've tried to, I want to stay on the right side of that equation, right? I want to help people. That doesn't mean, you make things perfect. I think security, and I know I'm not the first to have said this, perfection has been the enemy of the good in cybersecurity for a long period of time, right? You're not going to stop every possible bad guy, but you do those 4 things, you do the top 10, whatever, they're moving on. They're going for easier prey, right? Nobody wants to be the lonely antelope at the edge of the herd, right? That's a crazy place to be. Take care of that kind of stuff, and you're not going to ask people to execute rocket science, right? So I'm a big fan. I agree with you 100%, Eric. I think, and I'm a big fan of CISA and what Jen Easterly is doing there and her team. It's to bring it. There's a reason why our podcast, you mentioned at CIS, it's called Cybersecurity Where You Are. You have to meet people where they are, not ask them to come to the wizard side. It's how do I translate? How do I simplify in a way? It doesn't mean you're solving it. And, so you could take a view that said, oh, that's the trivial stuff. And I still know 10 ways around you. If you do that, then you're the wizard, lonely wizard, standing on the street corner, telling people what they're doing wrong. If you want to help people to make progress, to get on the right path, to, make it easy, make it tougher for the bad guys and give you more confidence in what you're doing, then you have to kind of meet them where they are, which is speak their language, address their problems in a specific way. Now, and this CISA is, you have to simplify kind of the behaviors that you ask people while you work the infrastructure, right? There are some hard problems that have to be solved. And you see some of them in that CSRB report, right? Improving the security of open source, improving the way we buy software. Those don't happen, in the next 30 days.
Exactly.
Those are long lead time, need support. And so, but you overwhelm people. You can't wait for those to get finished before you get to work. And you want to get people headed in the right direction, in a positive, constructive, valuable way, right? It is valuable to turn on MFA. Does it stop every possible threat vector? No, but it's modernized to the point where at relatively low pain point and manageability by average humans, there's tremendous value there. And so we need to start moving down more of those. So
Did you hear that, Rachel?
I'm a fan. I wouldn't have agreed to serve on the CSRB unless I was a big fan of the work that they
moderately.
were doing. Oh yeah, but there's always some holdouts there. There's always a holdout, Eric. That's okay. You can't aim for 100%.
I'm working on her. Get off the TikTok videos and use multi-factor authentication, Rachel. Come on. It's not that difficult. Okay, Tony, we're at time. I'd love to ask one question. Sure. I mean, you've got an illustrious career.
Sure, please.
What's one thing you wish you had done differently or sooner over your career that you just didn't do, or your teams?
That is a tough question. I don't know that I have a good answer for you here. I mean, at every stage, I'm doing the best I can with what I got.
Right, but hindsight's 2020. Boy, if we had released that data instead of in 2001, in 1983, we could have stopped the adversary for the rest of time. I'm making that up.
Here's my experience, Eric, is that there are some things that I thought I've learned. Number one, I'm a terrible estimator. I think, we can get all this change in the industry in 2 years. Well, 2 years turned into 5 years, which turned into 10 years. And so even ideas that I thought, if I could go back, I think I hit a couple of them at least pretty well early, but the time wasn't right. And it wasn't until later the right people showed up. All right. Or I saw the right knowledge or the right opportunity or the market shifted in a different way, that ideas just became, it was their time, right? There's a old saying, right? Every idea, was once an idea ahead of its time or something like that. I'm not saying I knew these ahead of time, but when I look back to things, I just realized, wow, a lot of this, maybe if I'd have done something different, but it just wasn't the right idea at the right time. And when I look back at my career, I had one chance to when I retired from NSA. And then this was somewhere in my retirement remarks at some point. I never wrote the one paper that changed people's mind. I never invented something. I never anything useful. And I say this, I think, truthfully and humbly. Everything I did was a function of the multiple people who happened to kind of come into the orbit at the right moment in time. And maybe that's what it took. I'm not smart enough or dynamic enough or clever enough to have maneuvered the world in a way that, that I would have liked. And I don't know that even with hindsight, I could have said I had done any of that. Everything kind of seemed to happen when it was supposed to. Even when I was ready for it earlier, it turned out, the right circumstances weren't in place. So I'm at peace with what I did. There were, I made some great, I think I did some useful things in my time, and I hope there's a couple more yet to go. I've made some amazing mistakes in my time that, I know I can't undo, but I learned a lot from that really shaped the rest of my worldview. So I feel, okay, I was supposed to do that. And here I am. If I ever made a mistake that I regret, it was maybe there were a couple of people I didn't pay enough attention to.
I think we've all made that one.
Yeah.
And, I regret, I've fixed a couple. I've gone back to reach back to people in my life. I'm old enough to want to do that, to really feel that if something really bugs me. A couple people have reached back to me, by the way, with some misunderstanding we had years ago that I thought was a simple thing, and they took it, they felt bad about it, and they've come back to me, and I really appreciate that. It's a very human, warm thing to do to people, and at my stage of life, I appreciate that, even if maybe they took it worse than I did, or whatever. So I'm okay. I'm sorry that's a bit of a dodge.
No, I think that's a very real, fair answer, and I think. Let me try to help somebody here while we're still on the air. Rachel, timing. You can do multi-factor authentication now, or you can wait till you have a banking problem or something else. It is about the timing, and I think it's time to don't wait until it's too late and you learn from example.
I can see I have stumbled into an ongoing.
Just trying to come on, Tony. We're just trying to help her. It's a big one. That and the dog talk TikTok videos.
Yes,
she spends a lot of time still doing that. I think.
I love TikTok. I'm obsessed with
Tony,
that algorithm. Yeah.
Great discussion today.
Yes,
thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Yes.
And the stories. Thank you.
My pleasure. No, thank you, and thanks for having me on here. This is the best interview podcasts or whatever we happen to be on. They're just great conversations that you wish to go
That's
on
exactly
another
right.
time. So maybe there'll be another occasion. And maybe you'll be guests of mine sometime in the podcast.
Careful what you ask for. That could be scary.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay, Rachel.
All right. Well, to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us for yet another amazing podcast discussion. And thank you, Tony, for joining us. This has been so much fun. And to all of our listeners, stay safe until next week. And we look forward to showing up in your inbox next Tuesday. Until then, bye.
Thanks for joining us on the To The Point Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by ForcePoint. For more information and show notes from today's episode, please visit www.forcepoint.com/govpodcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts.